All right, so our other topic for this week is chapter 18, which is blood vessels. So a significant part of this chapter does go into the names of blood vessels and blood flow through the body. And I'm not really going to touch on that a whole lot in lecture. We're going to focus mostly on that information for our lab material, and that will make up the bulk of lab exam 3. This is going to be a really hard lab exam. So you will want to spend as much time as possible practicing with all of these different pictures and stuff like that, and practicing with naming and tracing blood flow through the blood vessels. But for a lecture, we're going to talk about the structure of the different vessels that we have in our body. We'll talk a little bit about blood flow, blood pressure, stuff like that. And then we'll talk a little bit about fetal development of blood vessels as well. So starting off with section 2, structure and function of vessels. So the vessels in the pulmonary and systemic circuits are going to be a little bit different from each other. Same general structure and stuff like that, but we do need certain types of vessels in certain areas specifically. So the lungs are going to need a lot of capillaries, whereas the rest of the body we're going to have a lot more arteries and veins, and they're kind of subparts before we actually get into the capillary beds themselves. So blood is obviously going to carry gases and nutrients and waste products around the body, delivering oxygen and nutrients to the cells, and then picking up waste products and carbon dioxide and getting them back to the parts of the body that are going to filter those out and get rid of them. So we definitely really want our arteries and veins to be in great shape. So blood pressure is the amount of force that is placed on the walls of the blood vessels or chambers of the heart. And that's going to include that systolic pressure from the ventricular contraction and diastolic pressure from ventricular relaxation. So that blood pressure reading is focused specifically on ventricle contraction and relaxation. Your pulse is the expansion and shrinking of an artery, reflecting the heartbeat. And so being able to take your pulse, you are feeling that vessel kind of expand as blood flows through it and then shrink back down once that blood passes and is no longer putting as much force on that vessel. And so for the arterial system, that's usually what you want to be taking your pulse on, is the arteries, because they are going to have that pressure from the heart beating. Veins are not really going to be moving blood through pressure from the heart. All right, and so taking your pulse, again, just reflects your heartbeat. So our vessels can constrict or dilate. That's called vasodilation or vasoconstriction. And there's a lot of reasons why our vessels will do this. We'll talk about some of those as we go. But vasodilation is going to be the widening of the blood vessels, so they're going to get a bit larger in diameter, and vasoconstriction is going to be constricting the vessels, so they're going to get a little bit smaller, and that's also going to change blood pressure and how easy it is to feel a pulse. So we are going to start off just kind of briefly comparing the structure of arteries and veins here. We'll get into a little bit more detail about each of them. So arteries are going to have these 3 layers. Veins are going to have the same 3 layers. They're just going to look a little bit different. So for both of them, we have the tunica externa, tunica media, and tunica intima. And then inside is the lumen. So this opening on the inside of the vessels is called the lumen. Lumen is a hollow passageway. We're also going to have that in our digestive system. So arteries are actually going to have a much smaller lumen than veins, and this is part of what helps maintain blood pressure while blood is moving through the body. So arteries are going to have a tunica externa that is going to have a lot of connective tissue and stuff associated with it. It's going to have a few other types of cells in it. And then the tunica media is the muscular wall of both arteries and veins. And so the muscular wall of arteries is generally going to be a lot thicker. That muscle is going to be a lot stronger than in veins. There's going to be a lot more elastic fibers in this muscular wall in arteries than veins. So we're really not seeing elastic fibers over here in the muscular wall of veins. And that's because those arteries, again, need to be able to kind of expand as blood flows through them and then bounce back to their original shape. And then veins are not taking on quite as much pressure from the blood passing through them, so they don't need those elastic fibers to bounce back because we're not putting as much pressure on the walls. And then the tunica intima is also going to have some elastic fibers in it for arteries, but not for veins, and this is just that inner lining of the blood vessels. And this is going to be true of all vessels in the body, arteries, veins, and kind of their subcomponents. And then capillaries are going to have a slightly different structure because they are not arteries or veins. So we'll talk about capillaries here in a little bit. So here's just kind of that text comparison. So arteries are going to have, again, really thick walls, small lumens. Generally, they're going to look round. Veins are going to look a lot more flattened because if there's not blood passing through them at a particular point in time, then there's really nothing kind of maintaining their structure. The tunica intima, that inside lining, is usually going to look wavy because of constriction of that smooth muscle in the wall. Lots of elastic fibers. In veins, it's going to be really smooth because we don't have as much elasticity and we're not constricting those vessels. Tunica media, again, that muscular layer, really thick in arteries, not so thick in the veins. Lots and lots of smooth muscle cells, some elastic fibers. There are, like I said, going to be some elastic fibers in veins as well, but not as many. Veins also have some other structures, these nervi vasorum and vasa vasorum present. Vessel of the vessels. This is basically going to help provide nutrients to the walls of those vessels. And then lots and lots of elastic fibers in arteries because they need to be able to bounce back. The tunica externa, made out of a lot of collagen, some elastic fibers in arteries, not so much in veins. This is usually going to be the thickest layer in veins. There are sometimes some smooth muscle fibers mixed in there, but not a lot. And then the nervi vasorum and vasa vasorum are present in the tunica externa of the arteries, while it's present in the tunica media for veins, as well as the tunica externa. So those veins have a lot more of that present, those really tiny little vessels to help feed those cells. Alright, so arteries are going to be kind of broken down into some different classes. So we have elastic arteries, muscular arteries, and arterioles. So an artery, by definition, is a vessel that carries blood away from the heart. It does not mean that it's going to be oxygenated or deoxygenated. It's just a vessel that carries blood away from the heart. Okay? This is really important when we get into pulmonary versus systemic circulation, because pulmonary arteries are taking deoxygenated blood away from the heart and to the lungs, whereas the rest of the arteries in the body do generally carry oxygenated blood away from the heart. Veins, on the other hand, are going to be vessels that carry blood back into the heart, right? And so, again, all arteries are going to have these relatively thick walls to withstand that high pressure of blood flow being pumped out of the heart. And so these elastic arteries are generally going to be found closest to the heart because that's where most of the force is going to be. And so lots and lots and lots of those elastic fibers to help them resist that force. And so this is going to be like the aorta and some of the larger vessels. Again, very, very close to the heart. because if they could not kind of recoil and bounce back afterwards and withstand this pressure, it can cause them to burst, among other issues. Once we get a little bit further from the heart, we transition into the muscular arteries. And so this is going to slightly decrease the number of elastic fibers found in these particular vessels. And so this is going to be slightly smaller in diameter. So we're getting into some of the smaller arteries of the body, and we are still going to need some of those elastic fibers though, to help withstand some of that force. All right. So that being said, there is not like a single point, like there's not like a line where this automatically transitions from elastic artery to muscular artery. This is going to be a slow, gradual transition as we get further and further away from the heart, right? So there's no like perfect little line marking this is where it turns from this type of artery into this type of artery. It's going to just be kind of a slow, gradual change as you move further away from the heart. Arterioles are going to be the smallest type of arteries. These are going to lead into capillaries. They've got the same 3 layers as the other types of arteries do. But as you can see, that tunica externa is very, very, very thin. And the other layers are going to get a little bit thicker, but are still pretty thin in comparison to the other types of vessels, because these are going to be much smaller vessels. So we're only going to have 1 or 2 layers of muscle cells here in that tunica media, as you can see, instead of many, many layers. We only have a couple layers of those cells. Pressure is going to be pretty low in here, and we're just getting down into that smaller and smaller lumen, so only about 30 micrometers. And so this is really important to help slow down blood flow before it gets into the capillaries. And because we don't want to be pumping really high pressure blood through capillaries, because then it's not actually going to be able to do the gas exchange that it needs to, and all of the nutrient and waste exchange that they need to. So they're really, really important for regulating that blood pressure. Atherosclerosis, we talked a little bit about this in the heart videos, but atherosclerosis is this buildup of plaque, again, in an artery specifically. This is usually going to happen in arteries. And so in a normal artery, we should have a nice clear open lumen, but with atherosclerosis, we are going to start blocking that lumen, which is going to decrease the amount of blood that's able to flow through there, but we're still getting the same amount of blood trying to get through there, and it's going to increase pressure on these vessel walls and can cause a lot of issues. And so you can see over here in this micrograph image, we've got some plaque buildup right here, and you can actually see a little bit of a bulge in the vessel right here, because that blood is putting a lot of pressure there trying to get around this plaque buildup, to get all of that blood flow through this vessel to where it needs to get. And so this is also going to harden the arteries, so this plaque is going to cause the walls of the arteries that it's attached to get a little bit more hard. So it's not going to be as elastic, it's not going to be able to bounce back as easily, and it can make it really, really weak, and can cause a lot of issues there. Lifestyle changes, like changing diet, not smoking, stuff like that, can all help a lot to break up plaques, or prevent them from forming ideally, or getting worse. Most people are going to have some plaques. They're just usually going to be minor. And so we can also do medications for cholesterol and blood pressure. And then again, we can go in and surgically try to fix this a couple different ways, or just bypass it altogether if it's severe enough. We are going to pick up with capillaries in the next video.